My name is Chloe, and at 26, I never thought I'd be a university student sleeping in my car for 3 months while juggling 2 jobs. The trust fund my father left for my education had somehow evaporated, while my stepmother and her children enjoyed a life of ease. Then my wealthy Uncle Arthur spotted me, looking gaunt and weary, during my shift at a local diner. That single moment set in motion a chain of events that would unravel everything. Before I get into how my life was turned upside down, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had to fight for what was yours with nothing but your own grit, hit that like and subscribe button. I grew up in a warm, loving home in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Chicago. My earliest years are a collection of memories filled with laughter, security, and a profound sense of belonging. My dad, Michael, was the founder of a thriving architectural hardware company, a business he'd built from the ground up. He was a tireless worker, but he always put his family first. Sundays were our sacred day. We'd tackle a big French toast breakfast in the morning, explore a new park or museum in the afternoon, and end the day with a movie marathon. Those simple routines were the bedrock of my world. My mother, Eleanor, was the soul of our home. She possessed an incredible gift for making everyone feel seen and cherished. She was a constant volunteer at my school, knew the names of all my friends, and never once missed a school play or recital. Her oatmeal raisin cookies were famous on our block, and our house was the unofficial headquarters for neighborhood kids. Mom cultivated a stunning garden in our backyard, and some of my most vivid memories are of helping her plant tulips in the cool spring soil. She'd tell me that watching things grow teaches you patience and gratitude for the small miracles of life. We lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house with a sprawling backyard. It wasn't a mansion, but we never lacked for a single thing. My bedroom was painted a soft sky blue, my favorite color, and my dad had built me a cushioned window seat where I'd lose myself in books for hours on end. On my birthdays, my parents would work like stealthy elves, decorating the entire house while I slept, so I'd wake up to a sea of streamers and balloons. These were the small, constant affirmations of their love. My father had an older brother, Arthur, a powerhouse in the world of venture capital. Uncle Arthur lived in a sleek, modern mansion on the other side of the city and was always jetting off for business. Despite their vastly different worlds, Dad and Uncle Arthur were incredibly close. They had a standing lunch every Thursday, a ritual they honored for years. Uncle Arthur never had children of his own, and he doted on me, his only niece. For my 10th birthday, he flew our entire family to Hawaii for a week, a trip that remains a sun-drenched, perfect memory. Family holidays were always a big production. Thanksgiving was at our place, and Christmas was at Uncle Arthur's. My mother would spend days preparing for Thanksgiving, filling the house with the intoxicating aromas of roasting turkey and spiced pumpkin. Uncle Arthur's Christmas celebrations were legendary. Elegant, sophisticated parties in his breathtaking home, complete with a Christmas tree that scraped the high ceilings and a mountain of gifts for everyone. Those gatherings made me feel like I was part of a story, a family with deep roots and cherished traditions. What I didn't grasp back then was how meticulously my father was planning for my future. The day I was born, he opened an education trust fund for me. He contributed to it every single month, sometimes cutting back on his own wants to ensure it grew steadily. It was a substantial sum, enough to cover a full undergraduate degree and even a master's program if I so chose. Dad was determined to give me the opportunities he never had. An education, Chloe, he'd often say, is the one thing no one can ever take from you. He dreamed of seeing me walk across a university stage, the first in our family to earn a degree. The world fractured when I was 12. Mom began suffering from debilitating headaches. After weeks of tests and mounting worry, the diagnosis was delivered. A brain tumor. It was aggressive and inoperable. The doctors gave her 6 months. She fought with grace for 9. Those 9 months warped our happy home into a hushed space of whispered conversations, medication schedules, and the quiet hum of medical equipment. The medical bills piled up relentlessly, even with good insurance. Dad started working even longer hours to cover the costs, all while trying to be present for both Mom and me. I'd overhear his strained late-night phone calls, pleading with insurance adjusters or arranging payment plans with the hospital. He tried to shield me from the financial stress, but I saw the worry etching deeper lines around his eyes. I grew up fast during that time. While my friends were at sleepovers and trips to the mall, I was learning how to administer Mom's medication, how to help her to the bathroom, and how to hold it together when her own strength failed. Dad taught me how to make simple dinners, do the laundry, and keep our home from falling apart. We became a team, bound by our love for Mom and our shared mission to make her last days as peaceful as possible. Mom passed away in the spring, just as the garden she so adored was bursting into bloom. The day of her funeral was unnervingly beautiful, with a brilliant blue sky and the trees in full flower. It felt fundamentally wrong for the world to be so lovely when our own world had been shattered. Uncle Arthur stood with us at the graveside, his hand resting on Dad's shoulder, the two brothers suddenly looking much older than their years. The months that followed Mom's death are a blur of grief. Dad buried himself in his work, often returning home late at night, his eyes red-rimmed from private tears. I would have dinner waiting for him, a skill I'd mastered during Mom's illness. We seldom spoke of our loss directly, but sometimes we'd sit together, flipping through old photo albums, sharing quiet memories of her. Those silent evenings forged a new, more somber bond between us as we navigated our sorrow. Uncle Arthur grew more distant in this period. He'd still come by for an occasional dinner and always remembered my birthday, but the regular Thursday lunches with Dad ceased. I would later learn that Arthur had strongly disagreed with some of Dad's choices regarding Mom's care, creating a rift between them. Dad never spoke ill of his brother, but the easy camaraderie they once shared had clearly vanished. Despite the grief, Dad and I found a new normal. We held on to some of Mom's traditions while forging new ones. I poured myself into my schoolwork, knowing it would make both my parents proud. And Dad, even in the tight financial aftermath of Mom's illness, never missed a single contribution to my education fund. Life was quieter, sadder, but we were a unit, facing it together. 2 years after we lost Mom, Dad introduced me to Isabel. They'd met at a business conference. She worked in marketing for one of his suppliers. Isabel was polished, charismatic, and seemed to take a genuine interest in me. She peppered me with questions about my school, my friends, and my hobbies, all with an air of sincere curiosity. After seeing Dad so lonely for so long, it was a relief to see him smiling again. Isabel had 2 children from a previous marriage. Leo was 17, tall and athletic, with a confident swagger and an interest in business like his mother. Mia was 15, just a year older than me, and was a quiet, artistic type. Our first dinner together was a performance of perfect manners. Leo asked Dad intelligent questions about his company, and Mia complimented a drawing I had hanging in the hall. I wanted to be happy for my dad, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all happening too fast. Still, I resolved to be supportive. Before I knew it, Isabel, Leo, and Mia were moving into our house. Suddenly, our quiet home was loud and chaotic again. Leo took over the guest room, and Dad converted his small home office into a bedroom for Mia. The changes started small. Whenever Dad was home, Isabel was the model stepmother, warm, inclusive, and attentive. She'd ask about my day, praise my good grades, and make a point of including me in their family chatter. But the moment Dad left for work, a chill would descend. Her smiles wouldn't reach her eyes, her questions felt more like interrogations, and she began making subtle, unfavorable comparisons between me and Mia. Leo and Mia quickly followed their mother's lead. They weren't overtly cruel, just increasingly dismissive. They'd make plans that conveniently excluded me, share inside jokes at my expense, and slowly redecorate the shared spaces to reflect their tastes. My voice in household matters faded into irrelevance. One afternoon, I came home from school to find half of my bedroom furniture gone, replaced by Mia's easel and art supplies. Your room gets the best natural light, Isabel explained with a tight smile. Besides, it's time you two girls started sharing properly. It will be a good bonding experience. When she presented the idea to Dad, she framed it as something she and I had happily agreed upon together. Pictures of my mom started vanishing from the mantelpiece and bookshelves. When I finally got the courage to ask where they went, Isabel gave me a sad smile and said she'd put them in a special memory box for safekeeping, so we could all move forward. The handcrafted Christmas ornaments Mom and I had collected over the years never made it out of the attic that first holiday season. Our traditional family recipes were replaced by Isabel's, and our familiar holiday customs were cast aside for new ones. Dad was working more than ever. Isabel actively encouraged it, telling him how much she admired his drive and ambition. "You go be the provider, honey," she'd say. "I'll handle everything here at home." And she did. She reshaped our home, our routines, and our family life to her liking, all while Dad was away. Money became a constant low hum in their conversations. I'd overhear Isabel discussing the business, offering suggestions and pointing out new expenses. "The kids' extracurriculars are so vital, but they're so pricey," she'd sigh. Or "Leo will need a reliable car for commuting to college next year." Dad, seemingly grateful for her involvement, would agree to almost anything she proposed. Meanwhile, my own needs were minimized. When I needed money for a school field trip, Isabel questioned the educational value. "University is just around the corner, Chloe. We need to be saving every penny, not spending it on frivolous trips." She said this fully aware of the education fund Dad had established specifically for such things. The gap between Dad and me widened. Isabel was a master at creating minor conflicts and then swooping in as the reasonable peacemaker. "Chloe's just at that difficult age," she'd tell Dad after I'd voiced a complaint. "It's a rebellious phase all teenagers go through." She would frame my reactions as being disruptive to the new family, making Dad feel caught in the middle. Despite it all, I clung to my relationship with Dad. I'd get up early on Saturday mornings to have breakfast with him before anyone else was awake. We'd talk about my classes, his work, and sometimes we'd reminisce about Mom. These precious moments became scarcer as Isabel began orchestrating early morning family activities, effectively erasing our private time. I tried to be understanding. Dad seemed happy, or at least he wasn't sad anymore. He had been adrift in grief for so long that I was terrified of doing anything that might upset his newfound stability. So, I adapted. I kept my head down, focused on my studies, and counted the days until I could leave for college and carve out my own space once more. The business began to show signs of stress about a year into the marriage. Dad started bringing his work home, spreading spreadsheets and invoices across the dining room table, his face a mask of worry. Isabel would bring him coffee, rub his shoulders, and assure him she was there to help. She started joining him for business meetings and client dinners, positioning herself as his indispensable partner. By the time I was 16, I felt like a stranger in my own house. My bedroom, now shared with Mia, was decorated entirely to her taste. Family dinners revolved around Leo's sports achievements and Mia's art projects. My academic successes were met with a brief nod before the conversation shifted back to Isabel's children. It was painfully clear who the real family was, and I was not a part of it. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon during my junior year of high school. I was in calculus class when the principal's secretary appeared at the door, her expression grave. In the office, the principal explained there had been an accident. Dad was on his way to a client meeting when a truck ran a red light, T-boning his car. He was in critical condition at Chicago General. Isabel was already there when I arrived, flanked by Leo and Mia. She was speaking in a calm, authoritative voice to the doctors. When she saw me, her eyes flickered in my direction, but she didn't break her conversation. The doctors used phrases like severe internal trauma and minimal brain function. I felt frozen, the words not making any sense. They allowed me a few moments with him. He was connected to a web of machines, his face swollen and bruised. I held his hand, which was still warm, and told him I loved him. I talked about our last trip to Lake Michigan, how we built a sandcastle just like we used to when I was little. I promised to make him proud. I don't know if he could hear me, but I had to say it. 3 hours later, he was gone. Just like that, my father, my anchor, my only remaining parent, had been taken from me. At 17, I was utterly alone. The waiting room became a dizzying blur of faces and hushed voices. Uncle Arthur appeared at one point, looking shell-shocked and years older. He wrapped me in a tight hug and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Chloe." But before he could say more, Isabel intercepted him, pulling him aside for a private, urgent conversation. I didn't see him again until the funeral. The days that followed were a surreal nightmare. Isabel took command of all the arrangements, never once asking for my input. The service was held at a church Dad had never set foot in, led by a minister who had never met him. Isabel chose a lavish casket and opulent floral displays, playing the role of the grief-stricken widow to perfection. During the service, she delivered a tearful eulogy about their whirlwind romance. It felt like a performance, not a tribute to the man I knew. There was no mention of his love for old blues music, his terrible puns, or his tradition of making smiley-face pancakes on my birthday. The man in her speech was a stranger. Uncle Arthur was at the funeral but kept a noticeable distance from Isabel. He caught me after the service, pressing a business card into my palm. "Call me when things settle down," he said quietly. "We really need to talk." Before I could reply, Isabel was at my elbow, steering me away to greet some distant relatives. 3 days after the funeral, we all gathered in a lawyer's office for the reading of the will. I learned that Dad had amended his will shortly after marrying Isabel. The business was left to her, with the stipulation that it would pass to me when I was mature enough to handle it. The house was also left to Isabel, with a clause stating I could live there until I finished university. Most critically, my education trust fund remained untouched and designated for me, but Isabel was named as the trustee until my 25th birthday. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, explained that the fund was substantial, more than enough for an elite education and graduate studies. A separate inheritance was also set to transfer to me at 25, providing a solid start to my adult life. Isabel nodded gravely throughout the meeting, occasionally patting my hand in a hollow gesture of support. As we left the office, she was already talking about the need for responsible stewardship in these uncertain economic times. The shift in Isabel was instantaneous. The moment the legalities were concluded, her pretense of kindness vanished completely. That very evening, she convened a family meeting. Leo and Mia sat on either side of her on the sofa, a united front. I sat alone in the armchair that had been my father's. "Now that the unpleasantries are over, we need to address some practical matters," Isabel began, her voice crisp and businesslike. "Chloe, you'll be moving into the attic room. Leo is starting community college in the fall and needs your current room. It's larger and will function as his study and workout space." When I protested that it was my childhood room, filled with memories of my parents, her face hardened. "This house is mine now, and I will determine how it is used. Your father would want what is best for the entire family, not just for you." That same night, Leo and Mia helped their mother move my belongings into the cramped, poorly insulated attic room. Many of my personal items, including keepsakes from my mother and photos of my original family, never made it upstairs. Within weeks, every visible trace of my parents' life in that house was gone. Family photos were replaced with new portraits of Isabel, her children, and a few carefully selected shots that included my father. It was a systematic erasure, as if my mother had never existed and my own childhood was being edited out of history. The atmosphere in the house grew toxic. Isabel criticized everything about me, my clothes, my friends, my study habits. "Your father worked himself into an early grave providing for you," she'd say. "The very least you can do is show some gratitude." Leo began to treat me like a servant, entering my room without knocking and borrowing my things without permission. Mia was quieter but acted as her mother's informant, reporting on my every move. Isabel seized control of my finances. As trustee, she demanded receipts and justification for every minor expense, from school supplies to a new pair of shoes. "I have a fiduciary duty," she would declare. "Your father entrusted me to be prudent with his money." Basic needs became battles. I had to beg for money for textbooks while Leo was given a new car for his commute, and Mia was sent to a prestigious summer art camp in France. My final year of high school was an exercise in pure survival. I spent every possible moment away from the house, burying myself in school clubs and study groups. I got a part-time job at a local bookshop, secretly stashing every dollar into a bank account Isabel knew nothing about. I focused on my grades with a fierce intensity, knowing a good scholarship would be my only path to a semblance of freedom. The emotional abuse was constant and insidious. Isabel never laid a hand on me, but her words were weapons. She constantly reminded me that I was living in her house out of her generosity, that I was a burden she had graciously shouldered. She held her own children up as paragons of virtue, while highlighting my every perceived flaw. Through it all, I clung to one thought: this was temporary. College was my escape hatch. I applied to universities across the country, hoping for scholarships that could supplement the trust fund and give me financial breathing room. Every acceptance letter felt like a lifeline. My acceptance to Northgate University in Chicago should have been a moment of pure triumph. It was my top choice, with a renowned finance program. When the thick acceptance packet arrived, I tore it open in the privacy of my attic room, tears of relief streaming down my face. For a fleeting moment, I could almost feel my dad's hand on my shoulder, hear his voice saying, "I knew you could do it, kiddo." The reality check landed with a thud when I told Isabel the news. She glanced at the acceptance letter, her expression one of profound indifference. "Northgate is a private university. It's very expensive," she stated flatly. "I'm not sure the trust can handle that kind of expense, especially with the business being so fragile. You should really consider community college for the first couple of years." I stood my ground, my voice shaking slightly as I reminded her that Dad had specifically saved for me to attend a good university. The trust fund, I insisted, was more than sufficient. Isabel sighed dramatically and reluctantly agreed, but she made it clear I would be on a very short leash. "As trustee, I have to make sure this money lasts 4 full years," she said. "There will be no frills." The fight for each semester's tuition became an exhausting ritual. Isabel demanded mountains of paperwork for every single fee. She questioned the necessity of required textbooks. When I needed a new laptop for my coursework, she insisted I use the family's ancient, virus-ridden desktop. Every financial conversation was bookended with reminders of her generosity and my ingratitude. Despite the constant battles, my first 2 years at Northgate were a breath of fresh air. I lived on campus in a dorm, sharing a tiny room with a girl named Sarah, who quickly became my closest friend. That cramped space felt like a palace compared to the hostile territory of my former home. I dove into my studies, joined student groups, and slowly began to build a life that was my own, separate from Isabel's suffocating control. I kept my visits home to a bare minimum, usually just for major holidays. Each trip back was harder than the last. Isabel would greet me with a litany of my latest failings, followed by glowing reports of Leo's progress in business school and Mia's flourishing art career. My attic room seemed to shrink with each visit, as more of my things were relegated to unlabeled boxes in the damp garage. The summer after my sophomore year, I secured an internship that allowed me to stay in Chicago. Isabel was audibly displeased, but couldn't reasonably object to the professional experience it offered. That summer was my first taste of genuine freedom. I sublet a small apartment with friends and managed my own budget without Isabel's microscopic oversight. Everything imploded during my junior year. Isabel summoned me back to the house for what she called a critical financial review. She sat at the dining room table, flanked by spreadsheets, and delivered the news with theatrical solemnity. "The business is in serious trouble," she announced. The recession has hit us harder than anyone could have predicted. This was odd, as I had just read an industry report indicating the architectural hardware market was actually booming. The tough decision, it turned out, was the complete elimination of my living allowance. The trust had underperformed, she claimed, and they needed to reallocate assets. My tuition would still be covered, but housing, books, food, and all other living expenses were now my sole responsibility. When I asked to see the trust's financial statements, she became irate. "I will not have my integrity questioned, Chloe. Your father appointed me as trustee for a reason. If you can't trust my judgment, perhaps you should figure out how to pay for your education yourself." Desperate, I went to the university's legal aid clinic. The law student I met with was sympathetic, but explained that challenging a trustee was a costly, uphill battle that required concrete evidence of mismanagement, evidence I didn't have. Without access to the financial records, my hands were tied. I had no choice but to adapt. I picked up more hours at my campus library job and found a second job waiting tables at a 24-hour diner near campus. My grades began to slip as I struggled to balance a full course load with a crushing work schedule. I cut every imaginable expense, eating staff meals at the diner and hunting for free PDF versions of my textbooks online. When summer arrived, I had no option but to go back to Isabel's house while I searched for affordable housing for the next school year. What I found when I arrived gutted me. My old attic room had been completely transformed into a home gym. A brand new, expensive-looking treadmill and weight machine stood where my bed and desk used to be. My remaining belongings had been tossed into the garage, many of the boxes now water-damaged, and some of my things missing entirely. When I confronted Isabel, she feigned surprise at my outrage. "You're never here, Chloe," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "It was wasted space. Leo needs a proper place to train. You can sleep on the sofa." That night, as I lay on the lumpy couch, I overheard Isabel and Leo talking in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep. "That trust has been our saving grace," Isabel was telling Leo, her voice low and conspiratorial. "The business would have gone under months ago without it." "How much longer can we keep this up?" Leo asked. "Until she's 25 or graduates, whichever comes last. The terms are ironclad. But I've been careful, moving the funds in small increments. By the time she's in a position to question it, the money will be so entangled in the business, she'll never unravel it." "What if she finds out?" "She has no proof and no money for a legal fight," Isabel scoffed. "Your father was sloppy with the paperwork. On paper, it all looks like legitimate investments that just didn't pan out." A wave of nausea washed over me. They weren't just mismanaging my inheritance, they were systematically stealing it. The failing business was a lie, a cover to plunder the money my father had worked so hard to save for me. That night, on that uncomfortable sofa in a house that no longer felt like home, I made a vow. I would not confront them, not yet. I would leave, support myself, document everything I could, and build a case. I would play the long game. The next morning, I told Isabel I'd found a summer sublet with friends in the city. It was a lie, but one I needed to tell. I packed the few salvageable belongings from the garage into my old Toyota Corolla, said a terse goodbye, and drove away with no plan other than to survive. My first night in my car, parked in the far corner of a Walmart parking lot, was a brutal awakening. Every rustle of leaves, every passing set of headlights sent a jolt of fear through me. I had shoved my few possessions into the trunk, creating a cramped sleeping space by reclining the driver's seat all the way back. My reliable Corolla, a 16th birthday gift from my dad, was now my only sanctuary. With the fall semester still 2 months away, I had to create a new life from scratch. The next morning, I bought a membership to a 24-hour gym. For $30 a month, I had access to showers, bathrooms, and a safe place to be when the weather turned bad. I quickly learned to be there by 5:30 a.m. when the gym was deserted. I could shower, change, and make myself presentable for the day without anyone noticing. Finding safe places to park became a survival skill. I created a rotation: the Walmart lot, a quiet residential street near the university, the upper level of a mall parking garage. I never stayed in the same spot for more than 2 nights. Hospital parking lots were a good option in a pinch. The constant activity provided a strange sense of security. I kept my job at the diner, picking up as many shifts as I could. The early morning shifts worked with my new routine. The tips were decent, and it came with the perk of free coffee and cheap food. For evenings and weekends, I kept my library job on campus. Between the two, I was working nearly 70 hours a week, leaving me exhausted but with little time to despair. Every spare dollar went into the secret bank account, a lifeline for the upcoming school year. The physical toll was immense. My back was in a constant state of protest from sleeping in the car seat. The Chicago summer was a blanket of heat and humidity, turning my car into a sauna. I'd crack the windows for air but live in fear of someone trying to get in. Rainstorms were the worst, leaving a damp chill in the car that never fully dissipated. I developed a system for everything. My clothes were organized in vacuum-sealed bags in the trunk. A small cooler held a few essentials, which I'd restock with ice from the diner each day. My laptop and important papers were always with me in my backpack. I did laundry at a 24-hour laundromat, often using the time to catch up on reading for my classes. Personal hygiene was a constant challenge. Dry shampoo was my best friend. Baby wipes were used for quick cleanups between gym visits. I was meticulous about my appearance, terrified that looking disheveled would expose my secret. I carefully rotated my small wardrobe so my coworkers and classmates wouldn't notice I was wearing the same things over and over. The university library became my second home. I'd arrive when it opened and stay until closing, using the quiet study carrels and free Wi-Fi. The librarians knew me as a particularly dedicated student, never suspecting I had nowhere else to go. The loneliness was the hardest part. I was surrounded by people all day, but I was completely isolated. I couldn't tell my friends the truth. The shame was too great. I let their calls go to voicemail and made excuses, creating a wall between myself and the people who cared about me. When the fall semester started, my schedule became even more punishing. I juggled classes with my 2 jobs, often running from a morning lecture to an afternoon shift, then studying late into the night in an empty classroom before returning to my car for a few hours of restless sleep. My professors noticed the change. My work, once top tier, was now just average. I was perpetually exhausted, a ghost of my former self. My finance professor, Dr. Evans, a kind, observant woman, asked me to stay after class one day. "Chloe, is everything all right?" she asked gently. "You seem completely drained, and your last exam score was not reflective of your abilities." I spun a half-truth about working extra hours to save for a master's program. She didn't look convinced, but let it go, extending the deadline for my next big project. That small act of kindness made me cry in the library stairwell later that day. As autumn arrived, the cold became my new enemy. My car's heater was a gas guzzler I couldn't afford to run all night. I bought a sub-zero sleeping bag and learned to sleep in layers of clothing. On the most bitter nights, I'd splurge on a cheap motel room, telling myself it was a necessary investment in my health. I became an expert at leveraging campus resources. I used the microwaves in the student union to heat my meals. I used a locker at the campus recreation center to store some of my books. I attended every free student event that offered pizza or sandwiches, discreetly wrapping up extras for the next day. To the outside world, I was just another broke, hardworking student. No one knew that after my shift ended, I didn't have a home to go to, no bed to crawl into, no family supporting me. I had been living this double life for nearly 3 months when a chance encounter changed everything. I was working the morning rush at the diner, my hair in a tight bun, a practiced smile on my face as I juggled coffee pots and order pads. The crowd had just started to thin when a familiar voice ordered a black coffee. I looked up and my blood ran cold. It was Uncle Arthur. He looked older, more tired than I remembered, but it was him. He stared at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Chloe?" Is that really you? I could only nod, suddenly hyper-aware of how thin I'd become, how the exhaustion must be plain on my face. "Uncle Arthur," I managed to say. "It's been a long time." He stepped out of the line, his eyes scanning me with growing concern. My manager, sensing a family moment, waved me away for a quick break. "What on earth are you doing working here?" Arthur asked, his voice a mixture of shock and worry. "I thought you were living on campus, focused on your studies. Isabel said you were doing wonderfully." The mention of Isabel's name sent a hot surge of anger through me. "When did you last speak to Isabel?" "Rarely," he admitted. "A courtesy call now and then about the business. We've never been close." He studied my face. "Chloe, you look like you haven't slept in a week. Tell me the truth. Is everything okay?" Maybe it was the genuine kindness in his eyes, or maybe it was the sheer weight of months of secrets. But something inside me finally snapped. Tears welled up, and I quickly wiped them away, mortified to be breaking down in the middle of the diner. "I get off at 2, I whispered. "Can we talk then?" Arthur's expression hardened with resolve. "I'll be back," he said. "We most certainly will talk." Those next 4 hours felt like a lifetime. When my shift finally ended, I found Arthur waiting in his sleek black sedan, a stark contrast to my dented Corolla. He took me to a quiet restaurant, and over a meal I couldn't bring myself to eat, the entire story came pouring out. The takeover of my home, Isabel's iron-fisted control of the trust, my room being turned into a gym, the overheard conversation, and finally, the last 3 months of living in my car. Arthur listened without a single interruption, his face growing darker with every word. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "I had no idea," he finally said, his voice tight with fury. "I knew Isabel was a piece of work, but I never dreamed she was capable of this. Doing this to you, to Michael's daughter." He shook his head, a look of profound regret on his face. "I should have stayed closer after your father passed. This is my fault, too. You couldn't have known," I said, a weight lifting from my chest just by having shared the burden. Arthur reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "This stops now, Chloe. No niece of mine is going to live in a car while that woman plunders her inheritance. You're coming home with me. Right now." Uncle Arthur's response was swift and absolute. After lunch, he insisted on seeing my car. His expression grew bleaker as he took in the pathetic, neatly organized evidence of my life. The vacuum-sealed bags of clothes, the small cooler, the pillow and sleeping bag bunched in the driver's seat. "This is completely unacceptable," he said, his voice firm. "Pack a bag for the night. You're staying with me." I hesitated, the pride that had kept me going for so long warring with an overwhelming sense of relief. "I don't want to be a burden." Arthur's face softened. "You are family, Chloe. The only family I have left from my side. You could never be a burden." His voice cracked slightly. "Your father would be spinning in his grave if he knew. Please, let me help." That night, for the first time in 3 months, I slept in a real bed. Arthur's home was as magnificent as I remembered, a modern masterpiece of glass and steel overlooking Lake Michigan. He put me in a guest suite with its own bathroom, stocked with fluffy towels and new toiletries his housekeeper had laid out. The simple luxury of it all was overwhelming. The next morning, over breakfast, Arthur laid out his plan of attack. "I've already spoken to my attorney, Mr. Sterling. We have a meeting at 10. I want you to tell him everything, every single detail." Mr. Sterling was a sharp, impeccably dressed man with intelligent eyes and a reputation as one of Chicago's most feared litigators. He listened without expression as I recounted my story, taking meticulous notes. "Based on your testimony," he said when I had finished, "we have more than enough to petition the court for Isabel's immediate removal as trustee. The use of trust assets for personal or business enrichment is a cardinal sin in fiduciary law. It's called commingling funds, and it's illegal." "What about her claims that the investments just performed poorly?" I asked. Mr. Sterling allowed himself a thin, predatory smile. "Financial records don't lie, Miss Roberts. If Isabel has been funneling your trust money into her business, our forensic accountant will find the trail." The investigation was a whirlwind. Mr. Sterling secured a court order freezing the trust and granting him access to all of Isabel's business and personal financial records. Arthur insisted that I quit the diner and cut back my library hours to focus on my classes, giving me a quiet place to live and study in his home for as long as I needed. 2 weeks later, Mr. Sterling called us into his office. The conference table was covered in bank statements and business ledgers. His expression was grimly triumphant. "We've got her," he said. For the past 3 years, Isabel has systematically siphoned over $300,000 from your trust into the business account. The transfers were disguised as investments, but there are no loan agreements, no equity shares, nothing. The company has been losing money for years, and she's been using your trust as her personal piggy bank to keep it afloat. The numbers were sickening. Less than a quarter of my original inheritance remained. On top of that, Isabel had been paying herself an exorbitant trustee fee and using trust funds to cover everything from Leo's car insurance to Mia's art supplies. "This is more than a civil matter," Mr. Sterling continued. "This is criminal fraud and embezzlement. The question now is how you wish to proceed." Arthur looked at me. "Chloe, it's your call. We can go the civil route to recover your assets, or we can press for criminal charges, or both." I thought of Isabel, Leo, and Mia, who had methodically and maliciously erased me from my own life. I thought of the bone-chilling cold of sleeping in my car, the constant gnawing hunger, the humiliation, and I thought of them living comfortably on the money my father had intended for my future. "Both," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I want to pursue both." The confrontation took place in Mr. Sterling's office. Isabel arrived with her own lawyer, a flustered-looking man who was clearly out of his depth. She projected an air of indignant innocence until Mr. Sterling began laying out the evidence, at which point her composure began to fray. "They were legitimate business investments," she insisted. "Michael would have wanted me to save the company for Chloe's future." "Then where is the investment agreement, Isabel?" Mr. Sterling countered calmly. "Why were the transfers hidden? And can you explain why Chloe's trust was paying for your son's car and your daughter's European vacation?" Isabel's lawyer tried to whisper in her ear, but she ignored him. "I was doing what was best for the family. The business needed an infusion of cash, and the trust was just sitting there. It wasn't just sitting there." I finally found my voice, anger cutting through my fear. It was my future. It was for my education. It was not for you to use to save your failing business or buy your son a new car. Isabel's eyes narrowed into slits. "You were always so entitled, Chloe, always thinking you were special because you were Michael's precious little girl. He spoiled you rotten, and this is how you repay him, by trying to destroy the business he built." Arthur, who had been a silent, imposing presence until now, finally spoke. "The business was failing because of your incompetence, Isabel, not because of Chloe. Michael built a profitable company. You ran it into the ground and then stole from his daughter to hide your failures." Isabel whirled on him, her face contorted with rage. "You were always jealous of Michael, jealous of his success, of his family. That's why you've swooped in now to turn Chloe against me." "My brother and I had our disagreements," Arthur said, his voice dangerously quiet. "But he would be utterly disgusted by what you've done. You used his daughter's inheritance to fund your lifestyle while she was sleeping in her car. That's not a legacy Michael would recognize." The revelation that Arthur knew about my homelessness seemed to be the one blow that landed. A flicker of genuine shock crossed her face before she masked it again. If Chloe chose to live like a vagrant rather than abide by the rules of my home, that was her decision. The meeting ended with Mr. Sterling giving Isabel an ultimatum. agree to a settlement that included her immediate removal as trustee, full restitution of all misappropriated funds with interest, and the forfeiture of her ownership of the business, or face the full force of both civil and criminal prosecution. Her lawyer finally managed to drag her aside for a frantic, whispered conference. When they returned, a defeated Isabel grudgingly agreed to the terms. The legal process took a few more weeks, but the outcome was decisive. Isabel was removed as trustee, and Arthur was appointed in her place. The court ordered full restitution, forcing her to liquidate her assets, including her share of the business, to pay back what she had stolen. Though she had agreed to the settlement, the district attorney, presented with Mr. Sterling's mountain of evidence, pursued criminal charges. Isabel eventually pleaded guilty to fraud, receiving probation, extensive community service, and a felony conviction that would forever bar her from holding any position of financial trust. Throughout it all, Arthur was my rock. "Focus on your studies and on getting well," he told me. "Let the lawyers handle the rest." As we spent more time together, he filled in the missing pieces of our family history. He confessed that he disliked Isabel from the moment he met her. "I saw right through her," he admitted. "But your dad was so lonely after he lost Eleanor. When I tried to warn him, he thought I was just being cynical. It created a wedge between us. It's one of my life's biggest regrets." He also revealed that he had been battling cancer the year before my father died, which explained his withdrawal. "I didn't want to burden Michael with my problems while he was still grieving," he said. "By the time I was in remission, Isabel had her claws in deep and I felt pushed out. These conversations didn't erase the pain, but they helped me understand. They also forged a new, powerful bond between Arthur and me, a bond built on shared loss and newfound loyalty. With my trust fund restored and my finances secure, I could finally breathe. I moved into a small, sunny apartment near campus and focused on my last year of university. The business, now under professional management hired by Arthur, began to stabilize and recover. As for Isabel, Leo, and Mia, they left the state after the settlement. I heard through the grapevine that they were living in significantly reduced circumstances. I felt no joy at their misfortune, only a quiet sense of justice and profound relief. Rebuilding my life wasn't an overnight process. The trauma lingered. For months, I'd wake up in a panic, momentarily thinking I was still in my car. I had trouble believing my financial security was real and found myself hoarding non-perishable food. Uncle Arthur noticed and gently suggested I talk to someone. "There's no shame in getting help, Chloe," he said. "What you went through would leave scars on anyone." With his encouragement, I started therapy. My therapist, Dr. Miller, helped me untangle the complex layers of grief, betrayal, and fear. She taught me that my hypervigilance wasn't a character flaw, but a survival mechanism. Slowly, with her guidance and Arthur's steadfast support, I began to heal. My grades rebounded, and I reconnected with the friends I had pushed away. I graduated with high honors, with Uncle Arthur beaming proudly from the audience. In that moment, I felt my father's presence so strongly, his dream for me finally realized against all odds. After graduation, I took an active role on the board of my father's company, learning the business from the ground up while pursuing my own passion. My experience had ignited a desire to help others who had fallen through the cracks. I started volunteering at a youth shelter, which eventually led to a full-time career developing programs for housing insecure college students, a population I knew was much larger and more invisible than most people imagine. The work is challenging, but it's meaningful. It has allowed me to transform my own pain into a source of strength and advocacy for others. I learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about love, loyalty, and showing up when it counts. I learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, but a source of incredible strength. And I learned that resilience isn't about being unbreakable. It's about the refusal to give up, to keep putting one foot in front of the other, even when you can't see the path ahead. My life today is a world away from those dark months in my car. I have a career I love, a home that is truly my own, and a bond with my uncle that has become the cornerstone of my life. The scars of my past are still there, but they no longer define me. They are just part of a story that shaped me into the person I am today. Have you ever had a moment where everything changed because one person noticed you were struggling? Or have you been that person for someone else? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be the very thing someone else needs to hear to keep going. Don't forget to like and subscribe if my story resonated with you, and please share it with anyone who might need a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, a new dawn is possible. Thank you for listening. Remember, your own story is still being written, and the next chapter might be more beautiful than you can possibly imagine.